Monkey Man went from this Netflix streaming movie to Jordan Peele seeing it and thinking to himself, hey, this deserves a theatrical release. And this is Dev Patel's baby, right? Monkey Man, it talks about so many things. But when I left the theater, one question I did have in my mind is, was Jordan Peele right to give this a theatrical release? Like I said before, Dev Patel, this is a story where he took a lot of risk and a lot of financial situations happened that almost caused his film to never see the light of day, with investors pulling out, financing issues. He had to use GoPro cameras for some scenes, and he just had to shoot things really quickly. Some scenes he even got injured in that caused like delays of film. I don't know, man. This felt like a story so personal to the filmmaker when I went to go see it. I can see why Jordan Peele bought the rights to Monkey Man in order to put this on a theatrical screen, because it's not a streaming movie. It's, if anything, it is definitely a theatrical movie. But I do think this is a start of a very promising career for Dev Patel as a director, because this is an example of a film that has so much potential, but has the issues that a first-time director might face. It's just that a lot of first-time directors don't get the opportunity to put it all on theatrical screens. So we get to see somebody who has a passion for film, specifically action movie. But unfortunately, there are some hiccups along the way that turned this film that could have been something incredibly beautiful, really great, to something where I think is very solid in a way. You know, like the backstory of this film is actually very interesting, where it pretty much is talking about Dev Patel's character as we know him as Kid, essentially. At least when we get him introduced in the boxing ring, we see him as Kid. We see this backstory essentially of the chief of police at this time period is pretty much genociding a village. I don't even know if genocide is a word, but I'm gonna use the word anyway. Genociding a village. And it's a very daunting backstory for Dev Patel's character, because essentially it's him having to see his mother being unfortunately killed because of brutality amongst the chief of police in this country. And it starts kind of like this revenge quest. It kind of doesn't start off as a revenge per se, at least from my opinion. It felt like the first half of the movie kind of felt more like we are just seeing the day in life of Kid, essentially, where he's in this match where he's getting beat up and he's losing and things of that nature, and we find out that that's just pretty much how he makes his money. Matter of fact, let's actually start with the positive. I want to start more in the positives first about why this movie really works for me. Is that not just the backstory does a good job of explaining the full reason on why a justified motivation for him to go on this rampage that we see later on in the film, but I do believe, I love the mythology. I'm really heavy in mythology. I love it. And so I love seeing how Kid, Dev Patel's character, takes the mythology of the Monkey Man mythology, essentially, and mirrors it, or really parallels that arc of Monkey Man being punished by the god, the Monkey Man's mythology of pretty much how their journeys align with each other, essentially. Because Dev Patel's character in this movie, Kid, also goes through the same type of, I guess in his perspective, kind of an arc where the more powerful, authoritative beings kind of come and strip you of your essence, essentially. And it causes both Monkey Man's mythology and how that story plays out, and how Dev Patel character plays out in the same way, where you kind of have to remember who you are. And during that process of remembering who you are, you start building back that strength again, you know? So I think the parallel between their journey was very interesting. I thought that tie-in is what kept me throughout this entire movie very well. And I saw some people also having this thing that I think is actually a positive than actually a negative, which is the shaky camera method usually. And a lot of these action movies, they do the shaky camera work where it kind of feels hard to see like where the punches are, what's heading, like the flow of style, essentially. And I saw a lot of people, at least when the trailers came out, was trying to compare this to Indian John Wick, essentially. But when you're watching this movie, it's less of I personally think it's less of an action movie and more of a drama movie with action elements in it in a sort of way. And maybe it's because like the way it's structured, where there's really, in my opinion, really two action sequences within the entire film. There might be a sprinkle of like a chase scene and a thriller every now and then, but really it's just a long build up to one action sequence and then another long build up to the final action sequence that you kind of see in the movie. It still works for me though, but I will definitely say that this was more to me a drama of someone dealing with their past coming to fruition and dealing with it in the most in the best way possible that they feel as an individual they can handle, essentially. So the shaky camera method for me kind of worked because it kind of highlighted the chaotic and amateur fighting nature that Dev Patel's character Kid kind of had. But compared to something like John Wick, where I think the John Wick franchise does its thing, at least the first John Wick, I would definitely say, where it was less of a shaky camera and more so the way it was shot was more like a professional. It showed like a professional hitman versus what an amateur would be like. So I feel like John Wick's was more stable, more fluid with his motions and everything like that with the way they shot the action sequences. Whereas it feels like with Monkey Man, it was more chaotic, more quick and everything like that. Very, very like I feel like on a meta commentary level, it works for the film. If it didn't work for you, I completely understand it because I feel like you know, we got to get out of that era of shaky cameras a lot, but I do think it worked well for me. With all that being said, though, I think the positive of the film is, like I said, the backstory, the arc with the mythology, with Dev and Monkey Man's character, and the shaky camera's fine. But with all of that, I still saw some flaws that comes when you're a first-time director that hopefully Dev Patel fixes, or at least sees other people's perspectives on why this probably didn't work with them as much as it probably worked for him. And one example is when you're doing film, you gotta have to learn how to kill your darlings, essentially. There's so many times in this film where you're sitting back, especially in the second act, where it really draws out the backstory and the motivation and his training montage and stuff like that, where it kind of feels like you're not coming to a halt, but you're definitely not, at least in my opinion, you're just waiting to see what else happens next. I think it's one of those scenes I can watch the movie and I can see the passion of every scene that's happening. I can see why, if I was making this film, I would keep all the same scenes. If I was also like a first timer and this is my first time making this project and I really wanted to I want to talk about everything in my mind that I've always wanted to talk about, and I want everyone to see what's in my head. I completely understand that from Dev Patel's mindset. I will say though that I think for a better film itself, there were a lot of scenes I felt like you definitely could have trimmed out. Like, for example, I feel like when he was in the temple with I don't recall the character's name, but he was an older gentleman, gray hair, pretty much helping Dev Patel like tap into his true self, essentially. I feel like a lot of that sequence could have been trimmed off the fat of it a little bit to really get to the heart of what is the purpose of him meeting this gray-haired gentleman, essentially. I do also think that you could have completely removed the woman prostitute out of the story, and I think it would have played out the exact same way of at least what his arc, what his journey in the action scenes that happened. Her only role in this movie was a potential love interest that is jaded essentially by society, or at least by the underbelly of that particular world, but she was already married. At least we didn't know she was already married until the very end of the movie. But in my opinion, I don't know what Dev Patel was going for with that particular, I don't want to say subplot, but that particular character. But I do think that if you trimmed off that interaction, it wouldn't have really changed much for me. I do think that if you did want her to be more involved into the story, it would have been better to have her as a little, not plot, I guess a little plot twist, like a little surprise, I guess to say, like a little surprise where in the backstory, he remembers her, like that tattoo she has on her collarbone area of like that little symbol of what animal it is. They probably could have had that same tattoo embedded on them while they're in that village. Probably like to identify like this is someone who is from that village. Just so in the flashback where they're showing the chief police murdering a lot of the villagers and things of that nature, we got to see like, oh, in that flashback, she was also there too as a young girl during that time. So it could bring that connection, and it would make more sense, at least from a story point, on why he was, how he's very protective of her and why he was trying to grow love with her, essentially, grow interest in her, essentially. So I think that probably would have worked better if she was included as like a part of the backstory, but instead, I don't know, it just kind of felt random to me. It felt like, what was the point? It didn't really pay off anything that really happened. I do also feel like there was some story ideas I felt that was underutilized by Dev's character. For example, like he was caring for this dog just to give him a gun, when he would go into work every day. But like, what happened to the dog afterwards? Like, is that your buddy now, or did you just like not care to look after him anymore? Like what was happening? Like, what is the reason? Like, were you planning to use this dog from the very beginning as a way to bring the gun in, or were you actually building a bond with the dog? Either way, I don't want to say it's a big deal in terms of the story, but it was something in the back of my head I was thinking to myself while watching the movie about, where is that dog? I feel like the dog would have been great in the final action sequence, to be honest, but it is what it is. Other than that, the other thing I didn't fully understand was the motivation for him to go after the political figure, gray hair guy, essentially. I'll put it like a visual aid so you know exactly what I'm referencing, but I didn't understand the motivation for him to go after the political figure. Now, the chief of police, I completely get it. It makes complete sense. But I watched Monkey Man a second time. Maybe y'all can let me know in the comment section. I wasn't informed on why he felt like he needed to take out the older guy. I get how maybe like the older guy was like a commentary on, I guess, something like, you know, like, I'm not well versed in any politics. I won't act like I am, but it seemed like the gray-haired gentleman represented ideals or a certain character that Dev Patel probably didn't agree with, so he wanted to use him as like a talking point of what issues or ideals that he felt he disagreed against. But I personally didn't feel or see on the screen why he, after he killed the chief of police, why he went to go after the older gentleman either. Maybe if I missed it, please let me know in the comment section, because hey, look, sometimes we miss things, it happens. So if there was like a line of dialogue that I missed, I would really appreciate it. But that's one of the things I saw. The other thing too is in terms of the action sequences, right? Because the trailer really relied heavily on action, you know, essentially to pull us in a little bit. But I felt like the story didn't provide any line of dialogue or any reason on why Dev Patel's character Kid was skilled enough to handle multiple waves of enemies. I don't want to keep comparing it to John Wick, because I know John Wick is an action, in his own story, own character, etc. like that, but just because a lot of people, at least what I was seeing on my timeline, were saying that this was supposed to be like Indian John Wick and stuff like that, and because I think John Wick is an action franchise that's being copied a lot nowadays, I'm just going to compare just for this instance, okay? When John Wick was being set up, right, before we got into the whole action sequences of John Wick 1, you didn't really see him fighting yet, but you heard the world. Whenever John Wick's name was brought up, you just heard people say, ooh, like, oh, he's a bad man. Or, oh, he messed with John Wick? Well, that's bad. Things of that nature. Like, you heard rumblings from other characters in the world describing how bad John Wick was. In this movie, you don't get the sense that Dev Patel's Kid character is capable of fighting anybody, let alone multiple waves of people. So, mind you, when we get introduced to Dev Patel's character, he kind of is getting beat up by King Cobra, right, the wrestler. And when he's talking to the promoter, he's talking to himself like, hey, where's my money? Because he got paid half in the movie. And the promoter's like, well, you gotta bleed more. You gotta make it entertaining. So we get the sense that, okay, he is not winning these fights. He's definitely not winning these fights. So in the second half of the movie, where he's beating up all these hordes of enemies, to me in my head, I was sitting there watching and I was like, I don't think he's supposed to be winning like this, right? And I know what people might say, which is, oh, well, when he was in the temple with the older gentleman, they had the training montage. I don't know. To me personally, I don't think it was that believable to say that, oh, he just trained. Mind you, the guy didn't train him. He used his drums to synchronize with Dev Patel's punches, but I don't know how that computes that, oh, I'm now learning how to fight with music synchronization, if you get what I'm trying to say. Maybe I'm ignorant, I'm not sure, but hey, it is, I would definitely love to know if it worked for you. For me, it didn't really work. But that's really most of the things that I feel like were the negatives of the film. But I do think that overall, even though I gave some negatives to like stories and characters of this film, I do think it was a still enjoyable, fun time where you got to see the mindset of Dev Patel's character. Even though he does throw a lot out there that I do think is a little bit undercooked, like he's trying to talk about politics, religion, people, society, and everything like that. I feel like if he stripped a lot of that stuff away, we probably would have had a more focused film on just him as a person, instead of like throwing in the political figures of it. But overall, other than that, the backstory is really intriguing. I think the arc and the mythology Monkey Man's mythology was very utilized extremely well. That kept me captivated about Dev Patel's mindset in the film. And I do think the shaky camera method really kept me engaged as well. And I think the bloody R-rated nature is something that definitely kept me above. So overall, I enjoyed the film. I thought it was pretty solid. I do think that Dev Patel has a bright future as a filmmaker. I do think there's some things I think if he went back and rewatched this movie years afterwards, he'll realize, there's some things I definitely could have did better here. But right now, I think this is a solid entry in Dev Patel's future. But I'll definitely be checking out more of Dev Patel's work, as I think he sold me as a filmmaker I gotta keep my eye on in the future of Hollywood. So let me know y'all thoughts down below about how do you feel about Monkey Man and how does it rank to you? Do you compare to John Wick? Do you see it as its own thing? Or what was your positives too about the movie that I probably missed, right? I think the humor was very spot on in the movie as well. So definitely share your thoughts down below. And yeah, it's a source plug and I'm out. Peace.